Good morning. I wanted to offer you the second tutorial that will walk you through how to complete the outline. If you've been in class, this should be pretty straightforward, but just as a way to reaffirm what we've talked about in class, or if you need to review any section of this, it will go in order of the outline. So if you're looking for the specs, I would fast forward a little bit into this as you see it being highlighted. If you have any questions, though, beyond this tutorial, please don't hesitate to email me as the essay will be due next Friday. Okay, so the first thing you're actually doing is you're analyzing the documents. The first tutorial walked you through the difference between your A documents and your B documents in regards to the Gilded Age problem that existed during this time, whether it was a social problem, a business problem, a factory problem, a social ill, if will, like child labor, whatever. And your task is, as part of your supporting detail, which is a little different than what we've done, is you're articulating what problem document A is talking about. So you're going to notice that I'm actually going to skip the thesis statement. The thesis is almost formed. The thesis statement is from the question: the progressive era, blank, succeeded in their goals of improving the life in the USA during the early 19th century. Before you can actually articulate whether they completely succeeded, they partially succeeded, or they did not succeed at all, you need to analyze each piece of document and put it into your outline as you go. And as you are analyzing the evidence, you are rating the evidence either completely succeeded, partially, or did not. And what we're going to find is at the end of this, that if you have all completelies, then obviously this will become completely. If you have some completelies for some of the problems and some partiallys, and maybe one did not, then obviously you're going to fall in the middle, which is they partially succeeded. And if all of your evidence analyzed supports did not, then obviously you'll have did not as part of your thesis. So that determination, though, cannot be made until after you finish the body section of your outline. You are still articulating an argument because you are trying to determine to what degree they succeeded. So you can actually complete your analysis based on the rating system from the document sheet without having to fill this blank line in until the very end. With that said, let's go on to the parts of the outline. So the first thing you're going to do as you analyze document A is you actually want to, after reading the document, you want to create a sentence that will introduce the category to the reader for whatever section you're in. So for this example, the first thing that we looked at was the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire and the factory conditions that existed during the early 19th century. We used the fire as an example, an extreme example of how terrible the conditions really were. For your A statement and your analysis statement, you are allowed to show bias because this is building around your evidence. So opinion and adjectives are okay. So you're going to notice that I said factory conditions, which is the category that we are talking about. So factory conditions during the Gilded Age, so I specify my time period, were terrible. So as you go into each new section, the first sentence you create for A should clarify what category it is: urbanization, child labor, party bosses, business practices, whatever category you're looking at. Specify your time period during the early 19th century, during the Gilded Era, were what. And then offer an adjective that will tell the reader what negative aspect these are. We know that these are problems because we've talked about the essay question, which is asking, did progressives improve or not improve the situation? So obviously, if they're setting goals to improve, we can understand that the problems are not good. So your adjectives should be negative. Then, using the article, you are going to, for any document A, you're going to describe and summarize the major problem that the article focused on, using some specs and ideas to formulate your summary. This writing style that we're doing is very cause and effect. So your A statements are going to be, or B, C, D, or E, are going to be your causes. These are the problems that happen. So for instance, the one that we looked at for the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, the summary that you include should explain the why did the fire happen, what were the conditions like, what were the workers working in, who were the workers, and then offer some details of what happened that day on March 25th, 1911, when the fire occurred. What was the horrificness of that fire, ending with that 146 women died. And then that would explain the problem that you're trying to face. You will need in-text citations for this part of your part A, and this should be at most 4 to 5 sentences. Pointedly, though, trying to avoid using direct quotes. Instead, you want to try to summarize in your own words as much as possible. If a direct quote is needed, you can use it, but I don't want this to just be a quote that you copy and paste and throw into the A document. I want you to try to summarize the whole article in 4 to 5 sentences. So once you finish that, then the last part of A is you need to transition. So for the example that I have, after summarizing the shirtwaist fire, the horror of the fire led to the progressive groups to push for greater reforms in improving factory conditions. Now, you can specify the group, maybe you could specify the person. You could say, like, the horror of child labor led Lewis Hine or impacted Lewis Hine to a point that he needed to tell the world about it. So your transition and your bridge is not always going to look like the one that I have highlighted on the screen right now, but the idea is still there. So you're going to notice that I'm telling the reader that the horror of this particular event led people to try to push for greater reforms to improve factory conditions. So what I'm going to talk about next are those particular reforms. So just consider that as you go into your writing process. The intent of this sentence is to conclude the description of the problem and lead into what your specs is going to be about. Apologize for that. Okay, so then that's your A sentence. Your A section of your essay is going to be pretty substantial because you're laying the groundwork for the choice of specs that you're going to use. Now, your specific example is not always just going to be one sentence. It may be a couple pieces of evidence that you're using from Doc B, but everything that you're going to do for your specs section needs to be unbiased and detailed. So after reviewing document A, there is a corresponding document B. Document B's purpose is to provide you with information that, because of this particular problem, this group of progressives decided to confront the problem in some way. And they came up with goals and they came up with what they thought was a solution to help improve the situation. So as you read document B, you want to highlight anything that would show that they are working towards either completely succeeding in their goal, partially succeeding, like laying the groundwork but not quite finishing, or not succeeding at all in any negative aspects of what they were doing, and how, or what they were doing just didn't have any effect at all. And with that said, then you're going to have to put those specific examples into your document. Now, you're going to notice that my first sentence says, in 1911, 3 months after the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, progressive leaders formed the Factory Investigating Commission. You may need to give a little bit of background to what it is you're about to put for evidence. So for instance, if you're looking at child labor, you need to explain who Lewis Hine was and what he did before you describe his pictures and what he was trying to bring forward in regards to informing the public of child labor. Then I embed my quote. So I've chosen a quote from the article that I believe will support the idea that the progressives were either completely, partially, or did not at all successfully improving the condition of factories during this time period. So I put through this time, the commission passed many measures, and then I went on to put the quote. Now you're going to notice a couple things. One, I end the quote, but I do not put a period. My citations to be the source citation from the document, U.S. Department of Labor, and my period goes at the end of the quote. If you read this quote, this is simply a unbiased, detailed fact. Unlike the A statement, where I used words like terrible, the horror, you should not be using anything from the article that is the author's opinion. This is an unbiased piece of evidence. I cannot stress that enough. Be careful. Do not use the author's opinion as evidence. You need to find what formed that author's opinion that brought him to giving that evidence. Find the evidence in the article that he used and was analyzing, or that she used. All right. So then with that, I've given my fact. Now here's the thing. The question is, what if I highlight more than 2 facts? Ms. Barksdale, can I put them both in? Yes. The difference, though, is you're going to need to embed the quotes separately and cite each of them accordingly. You may have multiple sentences in this paragraph. Every sentence should end with your in-text citation. You do not put all of your quotes in and then put the in-text at the end. So be careful with that. The same should be said for A. Any sentences that you create for the summary, if there's 4 to 5, each sentence should end with an in-text citation. Okay, so then the last thing you're going to do is you're going to rate it. On your document, part of Doc B, you're supposed to rate and explain why you came to that rating. So that will help you when you get into the analysis statement. Remember, the analysis statement's job is to first recognize the specs that I just talked about. My analysis is not analyzing all of history. My analysis is analyzing this piece of evidence. I am explaining to the reader why this piece of evidence supports my assertion or my thesis that I am trying to formulate. Please do not deviate off of that piece of evidence. You cannot make wild assumptions on a piece of evidence that doesn't exist. Some of you try to explain something like going beyond what the photograph actually shows. Be careful. You can only analyze what's in front of you and the evidence that you provide the reader. So I would say, through the development of the Factory Investigating Commission, which is recognizing the specs, and the legislative actions established after the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. So this entire section is recognizing the specs. If it was back to my child labor example, it would be through the photographs of Louis Hine and his work. If it's Jacob Riis and the tenements, you could say through the work of Jacob Riis and his, you want to recognize what it is you just talked about. So please don't forget to do that. Then I would say I would recognize the thesis. And this is where I'm not going to give you a specification, but you would say the progressives either completely, partially, or did not succeed in their goals to improve. And this is the important thing, recognizing the category, not just the Gilded Age, but actually the specific category that you're talking about. So just as a reminder, this entire section was about factory conditions. So succeeded in their goals to improve factory conditions because, and this is where you explain your rating to the reader. Why is the passage of these measures either a complete success, a partial success, or not successful at all? And this is not restating what the specs is about. I'm not going to put because they created measures that I need to say because what will it do by creating these measures? Why is it completely successful? Who does it help? Why is it partially successful? Meaning it's starting this, but it's not quite done because of this, or not successful at all. It is completely not improving goals in any way because, and then explain. Okay. I understand this is a lot to take in, but just remember this model, this tutorial, along with my support as we work through this process, you should be able to successfully complete. As a reminder, the final draft of the essay is due next Friday. The last thing you're going to do, though, after you finish all of your spec sets, is you're going to look at your rating for each of your analysis statements. You're going to look at the words that you used completely, partially, or did not. If you have all of one rating type, then obviously that becomes the word that you put on the line. If you have a mix, completely, some partially, some did not, then it should be partially. Be careful with that. And then you will then support the idea. So you don't always have to say partially for every single one of these to have it be a part of your thesis. Because what you're telling the reader as an overall assertion is that they completed on some, they partially did some others, and they did not succeed in this area. And that's part of what you'll do when you go to develop your proof statements. Good luck. Take your time. And remember, ask me any questions I have. All the best.